So welcome to the Sony Venice 2 Mini Masterclass. Before we get started, I just want to thank our sponsors. These are the sponsors that make PERG events possible. This year, in 2024, our sponsors are Arri, Astera, Duclos Lenses, Lightgear Panavision, and Taylor Insurance. We're going to hear today from Katie, who is a Sony Master Trainer and DP. We're very thrilled to have this presentation. Thank you so much for doing this, Katie. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining today and for having us on. This was really exciting to be able to jump into something. I believe that most everyone that has joined has one camera experience with Venice. So my hope is that I don't need to spend time on kind of some of the basic things. I'm going to move quickly through them. If you have questions, feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat. And our friend Tanya, marketing manager for the Sony Cinema, she's going to help me moderate. Awesome. So the first thing up is this QR code. This QR code has pure gold in it. I recommend you hit that now so that it'll pull up the link, but I also recommend take a picture of it so that way you have it for reference for later. All the slides that we're going to go over today are going to be on this link. It's going to have also some information in regards to the service center here and getting your cameras and getting Venice into it. There'll be a document. It'll be in PDF form, and then we also do a JPEG form, so that way you can save particular slides to your phone for easy access and throw them into an album or something if you want. I'll give you just a couple more minutes for those of us who are still either taking a picture or trying to pull up the link. Okay, so the first slide that I want to just kind of quickly gloss over, even though it's a ton of information. Again, this is going to be in that link that I sent. But this is just kind of the entire cinema line, and it's all the specs that people constantly ask me over the years. So the difference between Venice 2, original Burano, all the way down to the FX30. Some of the things that I like to note in particular is, for one, FX30 and FX3. FX30 is a Super 35 sensor. Everything else is full frame large format. There's also dual base ISO, and then when we get to FR7 and FX6, FX3, it's a base and a high sensitivity mode, meaning at 800 looks good. At 12,800 there is a little bit of noise in there, and there's also noise reduction options available. So those are some things I'd like to note. And then the last thing I like to bring up is that all of the cameras are based off of the same color space. All S-Log3, S-Gamut3, and S-Gamut3.Cine. Obviously vital, especially when you're mixing and matching so much when you're going into post. We have a lot of DPs that come in and ask questions, which camera should I use? Because it's a tool for a story. So those are all things that we like to just kind of show them, like, okay, let's break it down. What are you shooting? Where are you putting it? What's your deliverable? All of those things. And then this slide, this shows what media goes to what camera, because Burano came out and now there's a CF Express Type B that has been introduced into the Sony universe. This is just breaking down because I also noticed that a lot of people with Burano and FX9 started kind of speculating, oh, it's kind of like an XQD. It's not an XQD. They are not the same thing. And they will not work interchangeably between the cameras. So that's just something that I wanted to catch ahead of time before Burano officially came out. So here's a list of features that Venice 2 has. Obviously, we've all seen it. You can look at it later, Google it if you really want. But one of the big things that I find myself talking about with DPs who come in is that the Venice 2 is an 8.6K, so it's more resolution, as opposed to the original Venice that's 6K, but it doesn't feel hyper digital, even though it's at 8K. It seems like there's some things that are different about the Venice 2 sensor that have improved since the original. And when you really get in and dive into the pixels, we found a lot of DPs will convert because of Venice 2, because they like the look. They like the detail without it feeling like, especially with actresses, when they hear 8K, they freak out. That the Venice 2 has seemed to alleviate some of that freak out. It doesn't feel hyper digital. And the highlight roll off has also improved with the Venice 2. A lot of that is also contributed to the fact that the Venice 2 has 16 stops of dynamic range and the original Venice had 15 plus. So that extra stop of dynamic range has really improved highlight roll off in the Venice color space in the Venice universe. Other differences between Venice and Venice 2, the R7 on the original Venice was for the OCN or raw recording. That has been eliminated with the Venice 2. The Venice 2 has OCN internally, as well as you can do a 4K ProRes deliverable off of the different imager modes. With the original Venice, you have the option to do XAVC, which is 10-bit, or you can do an HD ProRes. Usually people are just using that for proxies or maybe social deliverables or something to that effect. And then the R7 on the original was where the OCN came out of. So that being said, Venice 2 does not have an XAVC option. Sometimes that is make or break for some productions and shows, as you probably well know. So that's some of the bigger differences. Also the sensor, the 8K sensor, I have to find myself discussing this with first ACs a lot also. The 6K sensor heatsink is a little smaller. 8K sensor heatsink is a little chunkier. So the 8K heatsink on the Venice sensor, on the Venice 2 sensor, will physically not fit into the old Rialto. And it just has to do with, for obvious reasons, you know, for cooling and for space and things like that, when it came to being able to get rid of this R7 and just keep it all internal. So that's something else of note, is that the heatsink difference makes a difference on which Rialto you use. And then it's also 44 millimeter shorter, as well as a pound lighter, because we subtracted the R7. Do we have any questions so far about that? Tanya, anybody?
No questions so far.
Awesome. Okay, so these are all of the imager modes that are available with Venice 2 as full frame and open gate, as 8.6K 3.2 full frame, and as small as our 5.5239, which is what helps us get to 120 frames. Something else to note, that the Venice cameras, Venice 2 and original Venice, are open gate. Burano is going to give you a 17:9 or 16:9 deliverable, even though it's full frame. It's large format, but it's not going to give you full frame deliverable. So Venice 2 having that full frame 3.2 8.6K is going to be the most open gate that you're going to get. And then just for fun, I just want to show, if we go to the side of the camera, if I push menu once, I go to our favorite menu, project menu. I go to imager mode, and I'm going to select in on imager mode, and then scroll between to go to 8.6K 3.2, and it changes instantly. I know this is a little bit difficult to see, but if I click over just to show you one more time, I'm going to select in on imager mode, and I'm going to just go to the tightest imager that we've got, and it changes instantly. And that's just, and that will show on all SDIs. So 1, 2, 3, and 4, monitor out, and HDMI out. Then I just want to briefly go over anamorphic mode as well. Venice 2 has all of these anamorphic modes available. The blue box is what shows where you need the anamorphic license. So the good news is you only need an anamorphic license and a full frame license, as opposed to you don't need a high frame rate license anymore. So that's really great. You have frame rate for free. So, but basically, if you want to have any D-squeeze available in the Venice 2, you will need an anamorphic license. To do anamorphic mode in Venice 2, that changed. In Venice original, you kind of had to dig into some of the menus. With Venice 2, if I go to the side of the camera, I can just go into, actually, you know what, I'm going to go up to 8.6K 3.2. And then I have an anamorphic D-squeeze, and it gives me the options of D-squeeze. When you are in large format, when you're in full frame, it gives you 1.25, 1.3, 1.5, 1.6, 1.8, it gives you everything, okay? If I back out and I'm gonna go to like an I'm gonna do an 8.6K 17.9. If I scroll to my D-squeeze, there's going to be a few options that are grayed out. i.e. 1.5. So if we refer to the chart, this tells you what is available and what isn't available. Honestly, the answer is because it just has to do with, the engineer saying like that this imager mode with this desqueeze option gives you this kind of perfect pixel count or aspect ratio that you're looking for. And so when you go into a 8.6K 17:9, 1.5 is not a perfect fit for that imager mode. Granted, we understand that DPs, filmmakers alike want to have all desqueeze options available for all imager modes. They want to pick what lenses they have and all of that. So it is on the list of things to just have all of the desqueeze options available on the imager mode. I don't know what that timeline looks like, but it is on the list of requests. And right now it's on the top of the list for most of the cameras in the next updates. So we'll see what happens. One other, and it's also something to note is that anamorphic desqueeze is for monitoring purposes only. So you're only going to get them out of the SDIs and HDMI. They will not bake into the media, but that's true for just about every manufacturer. I see a couple in the chat. Is there any questions?
I think Gaston is typing a question. Gaston, do you want to unmute and are you good, or do you want to share your question?
Hi. Yeah, I just put the question on the chat if you want to read it from there.
Let's see. He's asking if there's any update on the roadmap for 4K. Is that supposed to be UHD at 120 frames per second? Clients reject Venice 2 and downgrade to Venice 1 for that reason.
So for Venice 2, asking for a 4K UHD is what you want?
Yes, correct.
I don't know. I do have a roadmap on here. I don't know that UHD is on the roadmap for that version, and I don't know how far in advance they are going. So like for a version 3 update, I don't see UHD on there at the moment, unless Tanya, do you know anything else of 4K UHD?
I don't know of anything, but we can certainly add that, especially if ProRes isn't enough, then we can certainly bring that up to Tokyo.
Yeah. Currently, the answer that we are given is to use the original Venice sensor to get the 4K UHD, but we understand for obvious reasons you want the Venice 2 sensor look with a 4K deliverable. So, any other questions? Yeah. Cool, so we'll move on. NDs, this one's pretty straightforward. all the Cinema-Line cameras have internal ND. Venice 2 NDs work in a similar method as the original Venice in that it's 2 turrets that spin between themselves to achieve the 8 stops of ND. You start at clear and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Here's a fun picture. I like this big blow up picture. I think that's a cool representation. If we go to the side of the camera, just to change the NDs from the home screen, I just push down on the bottom and I scroll through them. And if I cut to the feed of the camera, you can see it happening instantly. I think we're all aware of that. So now I'm just going to move right along into the dual ISO. Venice 2 is 800 and 3200 as opposed to original Venice that was 500 and 2500. The 800, 3200 option, we moved to that because a lot of manufacturers use 800 and a lot of DPs said it's really difficult to jump between different exposure indexes or different bases between different manufacturers. And so Venice 2 adapted, which is really nice that they did that. Something else that they did was that there is crossover. It's a good thing and a bad thing. The good thing is that there's crossover. The bad thing is that there's crossover. So some mistakes that I see people make on set is that they're in 800 mode. And they say, okay, we're gonna go to 3200 base. And instead of pushing all the buttons to go to base, they actually just toggle up to 3200. And that's not actually changing the base. That is just changing the exposure index or the value. It's redistributing your latitude, and that's it. So if I go to the side of the camera, I'm on my dual ISO, right? So up here it says 800 at the moment. If I select in on that, I can just scroll to 3200 and it's going to get brighter, but it's not going to change the base. If I go to the cut of the camera, I'm going to scroll between that's 800 and that's 3200. So I'm going to go back to 800. To change your base, you select in on the top center, change base. It's a 2-finger button push, so you don't accidentally change bases in the middle of a setup. And now we're in 3200 mode. And that's the difference. So if you can see I believe you can see my output or the metadata, you'll see the base actually change. So I'm going to go to change base again, change and set. I like using these examples because this was shot by Tico Herrera on the last couple seasons of Snowfall, which were really beautiful. He liked using 800 in the day scenes and 3200 at night. And then in some of the scenes when there was like more intensity, like on one of them, I mean, spoilers, there's a drug deal that goes bad and somebody dies. But he wanted to make that feel a little bit grittier and of the street. And so he decided to go at 3200 base and go up to 6400 because he liked the texture that the Venice 2 offered. We have a lot of DPs who have come in and tested. They do seem to like that the Venice 2 texture feels even more organic than the original Venice. And we found that a lot with the original Venice. I think a lot of people just shot at 500 and 2500 because one, they're getting used to dual base back at the time, and also a lot of people were converting to Venice in Sony. And now with Venice 2, I hear a lot more people experimenting with the texture in Venice 2, in the Venice 2 exposure indexes. So it's hard to see, obviously over the web, to see the texture in this, and I can barely tell. But again, this is Snowfall. I believe it's season 5 or 6, but that's when he really starts to play with 6400. All right, I'm gonna pause that. Okay, so now this one's just high frame rate. This one's pretty straightforward. This is a really cool chart that Tanya collaborated and created. And it just tells you what frame rate you can get with what imager mode and how much you're basically cropping in on the sensor. This is something, it'll be available in that link, but I also urge you to, let me see, I'm gonna stop and then go pull it up on Sony Cine. There we go. Sorry, I'm trying to access this. There it is. Okay, so if I go to SonyCine.com, Sony Cine has come leaps and bounds over the last couple of years, thanks to a lot of collaboration and work done by Tanya and her team. But here's Sony Cine. This is a great resource. It has a data calculator, LUTs, test footage, things like that. If you wanted to find that chart that I showed you and it's in PDF form, you go to Venice 2. And then you can scroll to the bottom of the Venice 2 page, and then you can download the file here. Or you can send this link to anybody that asks for it, crews that come in, things like that. All right, I'm gonna jump back over to our keynote. I see new things in the chat. Are there any questions coming in?
No questions yet. Please pop your questions in if you have any questions, everyone. Let us know if this is too basic too. Katie has a more in-depth version of this chart as well.
So just some notes to go into high frame rate mode. I'm gonna show you the side of the camera. To go into high frame rate, you go to your top left. Right now it says FPS, it says fix 24. If I select in on that, down at the bottom left, I hit variable, and then I can toggle between high frame rates, okay? A mistake that I see most common, or a call that I get a lot, or a text, is the camera isn't seeing audio, or it's doing something weird, blah, blah, blah. It's usually because instead of going out of variable or going out of high frame rate mode, they just scrolled back to 24 inside of variable mode, and that is maintaining a high frame rate type sequence. It's not going to be the base project sequence. So I see a lot of people scroll to 24 and select in. It says FPS 24. It doesn't say fix next to it, meaning that it is not the base. So to make sure that you're in fix, I'm going to go out of high frame rate mode. At the bottom left, hit fixed, hit set, and now we're in our base 24 as opposed to in high frame rate mode. Now let's talk about the most exciting thing of all, codecs. So I know we're all really excited about codecs. I am too. Thank you so much for your excitement. OCN, XOCN stands for Extended Original Camera Negative. The X is so that it sounds sexy, but a lot of people refer to it as just OCN, Original Camera Negative. It sounds more like film. It sounds less like a video codec. So it sounds more like a raw codec as opposed to a video codec. It's less scary to a lot of DPs or anybody else who's, especially if they're converting to Venice 2 from other manufacturers, OCN sounds less scary. The XT stands for extended. The ST stands for standard. The LT stands for light. XT is what a lot of shows are shooting if you're, like Marvel shows, right? You've got no budgets that are constraining you. You have a lot of high action, high VFX, things like that. ST is what most of the industry is shooting at. They found the difference between ST and XT isn't significant enough to take on that data load, essentially. And LT is for a lot of TV shows that want to shoot the 16-bit, but maybe don't have the bit budget. So they're trying to knock out 13, 16, 20 pages a day, but still maintain 16-bit. They will do LT. There's been some high action VFX shows who did shoot LT and found it to be fine. The deliverable is freeform, so use that information as you would like. But that being said, LT is still 16-bit and still accepted by a lot of studios. I think this is important to also show people because when you talk about the 6K original Venice versus the 8K, I think that the bit budget that people have in their head scares them. Because as soon as producers, we get all the time producers hear 8K and they panic. But we like to kind of show them this codec chart, even though it doesn't make a lot of sense. The next one will look really cool, I promise. XT, so if you shoot an OCN LT or ST in 8K in full frame, 8K, you're gonna get close to the same as if you were shooting an XT in 6K full frame. This is 17.9, right? And this one's 17.9 as well. So we like to show this when people start to get caught up in the bit budget of everything, that OCN is significantly more efficient. I guess another good thing about Sony is that everything's internal. So as new resolutions and imager modes come out, they can go back to the OCN and reevaluate the efficiency. And that's why XT came to be when Venice 2 or Venice Original was coming out with the larger format. That XT became something that was much more manageable than even the raw SQ from the F55 days. And then this one I'm going to show just because I like, yes.
Katie, before you go into that, do you want to touch a little bit on the ProRes option too if people want to shoot in 4K? Did you show that?
Yeah, that's a good point. So here's the ProRes option, 4K 17.9, and then there's a 444 and a 422 HQ, and I'll actually show how to do that on the camera. This is how you're going to get a 4K deliverable in a ProRes format. People that we typically see shooting with this ProRes is delivering to commercials, things like that, not necessarily as much with narrative. It's people who have tight pipelines and they work in ProRes, and they start and finish in ProRes, period. So to be able to go into ProRes mode, if I go to the side of the camera, I'm going to push menu. Again, in our favorite project menu from the easy access, I'm going to scroll down to recording format and select in. So I've got all of my OCN options available, and then I've got a ProRes 4444 XQ 4K option, ProRes 444 4K, and a ProRes 422 HQ 4K. Questions I always get: you cannot shoot both at the same time. That's a little much to ask of our poor camera and the media. So it is OCN mode or ProRes mode. So it does a full reboot with the camera when it's going between the two modes, because it has to pick one or the other. You can't do two at the same time. And thankfully the camera only takes like 3 seconds to boot up, 5 seconds to make a picture, 17 seconds to roll. So it's usually not a problem. But now I'm in ProRes mode, and here on my camera it says ProRes 4444 XQ 4K. And I'm going to go back into OCN mode. So I go back to menu, project, recording format, and I'm going to scroll to, I'm going to do ST, and then it'll do another reboot. Something else that we found is that when you're in ProRes mode, the de-squeeze options out of the SDIs and HDMI lose their function. And then not to mention the hard drive footprint of ProRes 444. So this is just 4K and it's only 12-bit. The hard drive footprint is here, and it is almost the same as 16-bit LT 8K. So half the resolution and almost the same hard drive footprint, but 16-bit, you get so much more information out of that. And I mean, understandable, ProRes is an older codec that a lot of people have adapted and adopted, or adapted to and adopted, but it just hasn't been reevaluated in its efficiency. So, but if it works, then it works. And then Camera Kit Data Calculator. This is not a Sony app. It's just an app that someone else introduced me to, and it's been awesome. It's a great way to type in a lot of different cameras and their formats and their codecs and see what kind of record time and storage you're going to get out of it. A lot of questions, I almost have these screenshots saved in an album at this point, because people will text me and ask me, hey, can you tell me like how long it takes a Venice 2 8K? And I'll say, oh, what are you shooting against, or what are you comparing to? And then I'll type in the information and screenshot it, and it's almost always some combination of this. But just to show that the Venice 2 8K OCN ST, right, that standard, that middle one, is only going to take up 1.91 terabytes in 8.6K, as opposed to the Mini LF, which is going to give you a 4.5 and almost the same amount of hard drive footprint, but it's ARRI RAW, so it's not even the same amount. It's almost half of the resolution. And then if we talk about LT, the difference between the two, LT is less and more bit depth and more resolution, or not more bit depth, more resolution, excuse me. So, and then the Alexa 35 is obviously another shootout and another comparison. So, but Camera Kit Data Calculator, it's this guy based out of New York. If you guys haven't heard of it yet, it's a great app, 10 out of 10, highly recommend. This one is just showing briefly what codecs and imager modes you can shoot to which card. This is something that's also available on Sony Cine, but the S66, the white cards, because there's like a white outline around the card, this is something we recommend. I'm sure that all of you have with the Venice 2. You absolutely can shoot with the black cards also. So there's some productions, they say, oh, we can only get 5 white cards. Oh no, and we say, well, you can use black cards as well, because it's very rare that a production is going to shoot in, where the white boxes are, and this is where you have to use the white cards. So it's relatively rare that we'll see production shooting in 8.6K 3.2 XT. Like I said, those are going to be kind of the upper echelon of the budgets. I forgot you weren't looking at me. Cool. I think we're doing pretty good. No questions still?
No questions. And as we keep going along, we're adding the name of the website and the name of the tools there in the chat. So jump in and raise your hand if you have any questions, please. And let us know if you need Katie to get more in depth.
Okay, so talking about color space. This is our CIE. This is allegedly what a human can see. This is within the visible spectrum. I say allegedly because how do you prove it wrong? SDR is something that we're all familiar with. There's 709, that's what most people are monitoring in. And then there's P3, which a lot of theatrical releases are going to deliver in. And then S-Gamut 3.Cine. So this is a Sony color space that that comes with the camera that all of the cinema line is based on in Venice, with Venice Original and Venice 2. This is for monitoring purposes only. So if you're shooting OCN, then obviously when you take that into DaVinci, you'll have to change your timeline to decide which color space you would like to work in. Okay, so there's S-Gamut 3.Cine, and the alternative is S-Gamut 3, So S gamut and S gamut 3. So we call it dot cine or not dot cine. It's usually how we refer to it kind of loosely. So when we're talking about S gamut 3, S gamut, not dot cine, you've got this yellow triangle, and inside of that yellow triangle is 2020, right, for HDR. And then there's ACES, that again falls outside of the visible spectrum, allegedly. When you put all of them on top of each other, I just like to point out that this red triangle, S gamut 3 dot cine, right? If you look at these triangles, red, gray, and blue, they all kind of fit into one another, like almost like nesting dolls. And then our 2020 and S gamut 3 are kind of like nesting dolls. They fit into each other, meaning if you're going to deliver HDR, working in S gamut might be a little bit easier to deliver and conform to, as opposed to if you were doing S gamut 3 and then had to deliver to 709, you have to make some adjustments, or vice versa, right? If you're in dot cine, it absolutely can go into HDR, but you're going to have to make some adjustments, and it might take a more seasoned colorist to be able to work in that kind of space or in that kind of way. I think a lot of people ask which one you should monitor in. I usually say, like, if you're on set, and I always use a music video as an example. Music videos are always using crazy colors. If you're shooting neons and the client is like, hey, the orange that I see doesn't look the same as what I see here on the monitor, why is that? It's usually because either the color space that you're monitoring in, or as I'm sure most of you may know, is that the color falls outside of 709. So another DP brought up a really good point as well that I noticed. If you look at this yellow triangle, so I'm going to go back, the yellow triangle falls here, and notice it looks like it almost captures more kind of blues and greens on this end of the spectrum. So good for like green screen, blue screen, things like that, or if you're shooting blue people like Avatar. And then if you talk about S gamut 3 dot cine, it covers more of these reds and deep oranges and yellows, which is more like skin tones. So when we put them all together, it's almost as if the yellow triangle and the red triangle has more reds down here as opposed to the yellow triangle. And so sometimes that could also be a factor, that when you change between the two color gamuts and the two color spaces, that you might see a difference in skin tone. And that's for, like I said, monitoring purposes if you're in OCN mode. If you're in ProRes mode with Venice 2, those the color space adjustment that you choose will be baked into that ProRes, because you're now working in a video codec as opposed to a raw codec. Just to kind of show you the difference between the two, this is my husband. I make him sit in and do stuff. I don't know if you can see it this well on your end, but again, this is something you can download and you can look at it like the original. But there's this neon in the back that we had special made, and it's meant to break color space and break cameras. On this end, I call it killer blue, because it's that blue that they always have at concerts that seem to just band and clip every time it hits the subject. So all the way to these different greens. And when you're looking at S gamut versus dot cine, the gradation on the green to the yellow is a little bit smoother and a little bit more defined in S gamut versus dot cine. And it's so small and minute, but sometimes it can make a huge difference if you're shooting neons all the time, if you're shooting in Vegas, if you're shooting, even if you're shooting like in the red light district, and it's really important to your character that this red is a true red, what the color space you're monitoring in, that the camera's spitting out, can make a difference in that storytelling structure. And then there's this video that I don't think will play well over the webinar, but there is this chunk, color matching and picture profiles. I put it in the FX3 101. That's on Sony Cine's YouTube. The FX3 101, and you can just go to the color matching section. It's like 5 minutes, but I get so many people who also text me and call me and ask me questions about what's the best practices for an FX3 color space to match with a Venice, or to do this, or how do you do that? So I kind of addressed that with all of the cameras except for Burano because we didn't have it yet. But as far as picture profiles and what color space you should be in and things like that. So I like to show that to people when they're here, because you can also actually see the differences as opposed to over the internet. It's a little bit more difficult. And then we've got our LUTs. So all of the LUTs that are on SonyCine.com, they're all downloadable. For a lot of people that are converting to Venice 2, they typically are coming from a manufacturer that's a little bit more low contrast than what Sony's kind of like iconic look of a higher contrast is. So Josh Pines, in conjunction with Sony Cine, created some low-con base LUTs, and he has a couple looks with them as well, but they're lower contrast compared to the S709 that was like a lower contrast for the Sony universe. If I put those next to each other, you can kind of tell when they're larger, but yeah, just S709 higher contrast as opposed to a low contrast base. And all those LUTs you can find on SonyCine.com, as well as all of the other test footage and tools and things like that. Any questions so far about that? We're doing really good on time. Yeah, and if there's anything, if this is really basic, let me know, and I can jump into some deep stuff.
No questions yet. Do you want to talk about how some rental houses are are ingesting the Locon LUT into the camera when they're showing it, Katie?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. So for rental houses that are doing shootouts, especially when it's like Arri, Sony, Red, the big ones, they are going to, or we recommend to ingest the Locon LUT, and that's just taking an SD card and putting it into the camera, which I have one here. Oh yeah, you can see. Okay, SD card, go here, and I'm going to put it into the camera first, and I'm going to go to menu. And I'm going to go to media. I'm going to scroll to format media. And then I'm going to go format my SD card. And I'm doing that, and it's 2-finger button hold for 3 seconds. So that way you don't accidentally delete something that you don't mean to delete. And it's formatting. So it's creating a very specific folder structure that is crucial. So that is still important. That's true for all the Cinema Line cameras. Each camera creates its own folder structure, and there'll be a LUT folder, and that's where you'll drop the cubes into. Hit OK. And then I'll pull it out, and I'll put it in my laptop, take my LUTs, drop them onto the card, and then put them into the camera again, and then you just load one LUT at a time. And this page on the PowerPoint that I have here is also in that link that I sent. So then you'll have, this is just kind of a step-by-step quick overview of how to do it really quickly. But there's the Locon base LUTs, and then there's some Technicolor LUTs that are super creative. I've noticed that when DPs come here to test, they like the Locon stuff, but they also like, oh, what happens if it's like super high contrast, if it's black and white, if it's this? And so I usually will just have a couple in the camera, because again, like I said, especially if they're converting to Sony, they want to see like everything. Rialto mode. These are just some fun use cases. Even though there's like the extreme situation, like in Top Gun, where Rialto was put in the cockpit, and everybody knows that whole story. There was like 12 of them in one cockpit, and it wouldn't have been doable at the time. But because of Rialto, they were able to fit 2 extra cameras in there, or 3 even. So that's crazy use. Or in a more basic sense, in Top Gun 2, they also kept it in Rialto mode because they were shooting in some really tight hallways, and they were able to gain, like almost 6 more inches by putting the camera body on the ground and then putting the camera right up against the wall to be able to get the shots that they needed. And then this is a fun video. So this is just Tommy Maddox's crew. I think this, at the time, they were on Snowfall in the first couple seasons, but they are super fast. They go in and out of, that's Alex Lim in the background. They go in and out of Rialto mode in like, I think 8 minutes. And that's not just Rialto mode, but that's GAC as well.
It was 6 minutes. They set a record because they saw Dan Ming do it in under 8.
There you go. So it's 6 minutes. There you go. So they did it in 6 minutes. And basically the trick, because I also get this question, is productions asking, how long does it take? What do you do? And essentially they kind of had like a pre-rigged Rialto where it already has the cage on it and everything, and they go in and out of Rialto mode. That's how they're able to do it so quickly. And obviously they have 2 ACs that are doing it. Obviously seasoned, I would say an unseasoned crew, maybe it's their first couple times doing it, will probably take 10 to 15 minutes. But after they do it maybe 2 times, then they'll get it down to like, you know, the 6 to 8 minute mark. Because I know this is also something you just have to, again, it's prepping. I know that not all shows or all situations are able to prep as much or as extensively or have as much practice, but just to kind of show that literally anybody can do it. I mean, even I jokingly say, I usually say even Dan can do it, but Dan's not here, so. This is a Rialto 101. That's on Sony Cine as well as the Sony Cine's YouTube channel. This one is just showing, it was a question I got all the time, what is all required to make a Venice have, you know, worst case scenario, a zoom, so it needs 3 motors, a monitor, MDR, and everything. And so I made this video just to kind of give an idea, and it's kind of quick, but it's to show in a nutshell how to go in and out of Rialto mode as well as put the PL mount on. Which kind of leads us into our next slide, which is E-mount mode. So again, get this question a lot, like, oh, does the camera have to come in E-mount? Like, no, it's super easy, anybody can do it. There's just 5 screws that are around, and it's a 2.5 millimeter. You pull that off and it reveals they call it professional E-mount. I call it like a positive locking E-mount because the collar turns as opposed to turning the lens, which is really helpful, especially if you have a bunch of AKS. The last thing you want to do is to have to twist a lens into the situation. Questions I get, why are these connectors are bare or they're exposed? Is that a problem? No, typically not, but some people will just put like some photo black or something over it, and it's not in it, that makes them feel confident that the camera is going to be okay. There's a little switch here that's called the collar release. So just for fun, I just want to go into E-mount mode. And I believe I'm using an FR7 for this. Come on. Wait, is it? Okay, so I'm going to just turn the camera off. I'm going to remove the lens. And I've got my 2.5 millimeter screw, Allen. Just like you would with anything else, I'm going to release it in a star pattern. If you release just one all the way, then it gets stuck and it makes it difficult to take out the final screw. And all I'm doing is just breaking all of them. One of the downsides, I'm sure many of you know, is that the screws in Venice original adapters are not captive. So I feel like most of everyone's budget went to just replacing screws during that time. And then I'm going to just keep going and do my last final screws. Okay, are these captive? Oh, they are captive. See, captive, yay. They're still in there. The biggest upgrade with Venice 2. So this is the E-mount when it comes. As you can see, the E-mount collar comes like turned off to the side. I'm gonna try and turn to match up these white dots. They won't, oh no. It's because I have to, there's a release switch that's right here that I'm gonna flip up. Oh, then I'm gonna flip up. And then now the white dots meet. Once the white dots meet, I'm gonna use, this is just a regular Sony lens. It's a 55 portrait lens. There's a white dot on the lens. I'm gonna match up the white dot of all, and then I'm gonna turn the collar. Literally 1 finger of pressure is good. Some people will really crank it, and that can accidentally hurt the release. Another issue I see is that some people don't realize that the release is there and they try and over crank the collar and that breaks the release. So we always we talk about the release with a lot of people and a lot of ACs. And then you see those are the exposed connectors. Like I said, some crews just put tape over and it's more just for them for security. And so now we've got, I'm going to power the camera back on. And now we went from like this really big, I mean, the PL adapter on its own is like 2 pounds or something. It's crazy. And then the next question I get is, how do you change the iris? So to change the iris electronically, this is something that a lot of crews do. This is what we like to do. We push user, we hit edit, and then I'm going to assign my user 1, select in, and I'm going to go down to all the way at the bottom, iris open, and it says iris open 1/16 of a stop. And then I'm going to go to my user 2 and select in, scroll all the way bottom, and say iris close. Done. So something else to note that I think people get confused about is the user buttons. There is user, when you hit user, it unlocks user 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I say number 1 button is on the operator side. So that's number 1 and that's number 2. That's not user 1 and user 2. So now in this tiny little print right here, it says f3.2. So that's what the lens currently is at. I'm going to push to open it all the way. And now it's at a 2.8. And if I keep pushing, now it's at 2. Oh, it goes all the way to 1.8. There you go. So you have to push in to be able to change it incrementally between 1/16 of a stop, or you can push and hold and it will change and jump 1 stop at a time. So I'm going to push and hold, and then just for fun, I'm going to show you what it looks like. And it's slowly jumping up 1 stop at a time, all the way to 1.8. So that, I think that's most of what I get about the E-mount. The professional collar, the professional locking E-mount, I think it scares some people because it's a fun fact. It's called E-mount because the flange is 1.8 millimeters, and that's 18E, so it's E-mount. It's the shallowest flange. Most of us know that. It's good because it can adapt to anything, but it's bad because it's really shallow, and I think people just get scared about putting a lens that close to the sensor, but the sensor's completely protected, and you're not going to hit it unless, I guess, you get really crazy when you're trying to change your lens. Speaking of things that break, service. This was something that someone else mentioned that we should talk about. So in case you haven't run into this already as a rental company, do you have a question? Does someone have a question?
Gaston has another question. Yep. Yeah. Go ahead, Gaston.
Quick question talking about the mount. Can you confirm on the Venice 2 the fixing the issue that the Venice 1 had with the lens communication? For example, with the Aries signature that does not work with Venice 1. I don't know if it's a thing of voltage or something. I don't think it's a protocol thing. I think it's like a physical thing. And I was told that Venice 2 fixed that. Can you confirm that, please?
Yeah, I think I need to confirm with Simon, but I believe it was with original Venice that the connectors were not physically there, but with Venice 2, they are there and unlockable, but it comes out of the box with just the Cook-Eye interface and not with LDS.
But Simon and I tested it, and it is a voltage thing, and you can set it from, I think it needs to be set to low voltage or high voltage, but we can test that again, Katie, and confirm with it. But Gaston, it does work.
So I'll push menu.
On the you're saying on the Venice 2?
Yes.
On the Venice 2.
Correct. Thank you.
System lens configuration. So let me just click through it, and then I'm going to do, you can choose top or side for which one you want, 8 volt to 24 volt, or just straight up 24 volt. And then you can turn the lens 12 pin on or off. So the way that I got to that menu was, that's a good question.
The 24, that's a new thing. a new menu item for the Venice 2. I think that's where that issue was addressed.
Yeah.
Adding the
So
24 volt.
that's a really good point. So to get to that menu, I'm going to push and hold menu to get into the deep menus. I'm going to scroll down to technical. Hold on, I'm going to do a battery, even though give me 2 seconds. I'm going to change my battery. Okay, so I'll go back.
It might be better too if you stop sharing just to get the bigger image on the. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so if I push and hold the menu button to go into the deep menus, I'm going to scroll down to technical. And I'm going to go into lens configuration, select in. And you can choose, it says PL mount interface position, top or side. And then PL mount voltage, 8 volt to 24 volt, or just straight up 24 volts. And that solves the problem that you were mentioning. That's a good, Tanya, do you mind just writing that down so I can add it to the slide, please?
Yep, no problem.
Thank you. It's a good question. It's a good question. Any other questions? Awesome. I'm going to go back
I have a quick one to just for reference. I'm very familiar with the broadcast mode in Venice 1, use it a lot, very happy with.
Yeah.
Is there any difference on the Venice 2? Any improvement? Any change, or is exactly the same?
It's exactly the same. It is going to improve in one of the firmware updates, which I'll show you on one of the slides it's got on the firmware. It's going to be an improvement in how much unlocking more of the matrix, so you can adjust those. And then on the Venice 2, it's just in a slightly different menu. So I'll just show you that really quickly. I'm going to push and hold menu to get into the deep menus. I'm going to back out. I'm going to go to project, and I'm going to go to, no, wait. I think it's in shooting. Let me just double check, because it was in like a slightly different menu than the original Venice. Oh, technical. So you go to technical. There it is. Technical, scroll all the way down to the bottom of the technical menu at special configuration, select in, and that's where you can turn RCP mode on. As opposed to in the original Venice, it's on a slightly different menu. That's the only difference about the menu structure. But then in terms of what's going to be different, let me just go, I'll just jump to that slide real quick. It's going to have added adjustments for saturation, skin detail, white balance, and shutter, even when the RCP paint control is off. So it's going to give you more paint control. And then it'll also enable 3D LUT availability during RCP mode, as opposed to having to convert everything into gammas to be able to get a LUT that you want into the camera. You'll be able to access your 3D LUTs.
And Katie, I think with that, let's hit the service slide and then we'll take, I think, final questions. Okay,
cool. So the service slide, as a note from our service team, they just wanted to mention, if you haven't run into it already, that that service parts has changed how they receive the parts. It used to be this like whole Sony entity, but they've consolidated and they go through this company called Encompass now. This is the website. The reason they're doing that is it was for, they're hoping for time efficiency, essentially, is what they're working on. And they just did it in like last July. And so they're still kind of monitoring if this process is truly faster. It's basically the big difference. And then the other thing that was huge was that on the pro side, the website where a customer checks service status has changed. So you go to this website, and I'll just show you. Oh, yeah, I'm going to share another screen. So this is what Encompass looks like now. Or this is where you get your parts now. if that's really what you really like. And then this is how you check the status of your service product. So you go to pro.sony/ue_us/home. In that link I sent, there's a document and it has easy access to the links. So that way you don't have to do this. And then you're gonna go to support, select in, you go to repairs. Oh, I go to support, I go to repairs. And then I can scroll down to, there's repair procedures, repair center locations. And then I'm gonna type in MPC, MPC 3610. The first thing I noticed was that it just says, it only says Toronto. If you hit plus on it, it gives you the 2 locations. We are at 2706 Media Center. And then through here, that's how you can like look up how your status is doing, where you're supposed to take it, all of those things. And then you can also do this MPC 3610. Oh. I don't know what, I don't think anything will populate because I don't have anything on there or serial number. So that's how you can check your model, serial, whatever. Okay. And then I had that link for you guys. Also in that link, because I'm not going to get to deep dive into it, this is the viewfinder. I don't know this, I can't show you what's in the viewfinder because it's a special cable, but the viewfinder on the Venice 2 and the original Venice, they're the same viewfinder. It sounds like they're making updates. I don't know how fast that's going to happen, but as of right now, you basically, there's the menu button, there's the scroll wheel, back, and then you've got the 2 user buttons. If you push menu once, then you get access to things like peaking, brightness, contrast, and preset. If you press in on the select dial and then push the menu button, then you can change things like the tally and the eye sensor on and off. Those 2 things a lot of operators always text me about. How do you do that again? Because the red light in the viewfinder can be like blinding. And then also the eye sensor going on and off can be really, really annoying if you're like in a studio, especially. I do always mention to people though, if they turn off the eye sensor, what that means for rental houses. The eye sensor is to protect the OLED screen to save itself from burn-in. So if there's like a bright light that's hitting the viewfinder, that sensor turns the OLED screen basically full white, so that way there's no burn-in. When they turn that sensor off, it means that if for some reason they're outside and the sun is blasting into their viewfinder, that there could be issues long term. So that's just something that I would bring your attention to. And then you can access the deep menus of the viewfinder menu only through the Venice by pressing and holding the menu button for about 3 seconds. And then this is what they all look like. And by going into the deep menu of the viewfinder button, or of the viewfinder menus in Venice, you can access double speed. And that's just something that it doubles the refresh rate on the viewfinder, so it's easier to track moving objects like high action, things like that. But it will only go as high as 60. So if you're at 24 frames, it'll go to 48. If you're at 30, it'll go to 60. But if you're at 60, it doesn't like go to 120. 60 is the max. Cool. That was good fast stuff. I'm gonna just put this link up so that way if anybody needs to hit it, they can, or take a picture of it so that they have it for the future. With that, there's really only 1 minute left, but is there any questions or anything else?
Then if that's it, then thank you so much to everyone who attended, and thank you, Harry, for allowing us to do this. Like, please feel free to reach out to Katie or myself if you have any follow-up questions, or if you feel like we need to do like a more in-depth presentation. There is like a more nerdy version of this, but we wanted to make sure we hit the basics.
This is great, Tanya and Katie. Thank you so much. And I will survey the members and find out if we should do another one, go deeper, go longer. This has been terrific. You guys are amazing. Thank you.